Hello, welcome to the Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob, and this is a video about manifestations. If you have been active in the online space in Age of Sigmar while Age of Sigmar 4 launch has been happening, and also during these first weeks while people are testing the games and playing them and finding out the pros and cons, like me, I've already played in 2 events and played quite a few practice games, with another event coming up at the end of this week. Therefore, I feel like I've already started to get to grips with some of the game. I've also done the Age of Sigmar Stat Center 2 weeks in a row. I've interviewed some players, or at least heard some interviews from players around the world, and generally have been keeping my finger on the pulse. What does this mean, oh silly man on the TV? Well, manifestations are a hot topic right now. Very hot. Some would say even getting downright toxic online. People are discussing whether or not they're good, they're bad, what to do about them, how strong they are, and a bunch of other stuff. I would say they are at least very impactful in the game and will continue to be so. I'm going to put like an early prediction that within 6 months to a year, they'll at least cost points, if not having a pretty massive overhaul and rewrite. But what are the pros and cons? That's what today's video is going to be about. We're going to talk about the pros, cons, and potential fixes for manifestations. Now, I want to put a pin in this. Maybe this is too early to be making this video. That's fair. Maybe this is too early to be making them. But I feel like it's going to be a consistent conversation. Therefore, I thought if we could put like a considered conversation out there, at least everyone would be able to have that conversation with, you know, a little bit of these things in mind. And therefore, maybe the conversation wouldn't be quite so like attacky, and maybe would be a bit more collaborative as a group and as a community, because we are one community all playing together. So me and the Twitch chat have been talking about this for a couple of hours, and we have developed a pros and cons list, and we're going to talk about it right now. Okay, so let's start it out. Manifestations, pros and cons. The pros, that they are cool. Okay, now I think this is obviously a subjective choice. You know, I quite like the idea of bringing on these physical representations of magic. I would prefer if there was a little bit more choice. I feel like the 8 realms in which Age of Sigmar exists are not represented very well. I feel like that is one of the cons that we'll talk about later. But they do, and this is going to lead into, allows for cool kit bashing and army personalization. So while some of the manifestations might look good, you can theme them around your army, which I think is very cool. I've personally done this myself. I've seen loads of other people do this as well. And I think that that's actually a massive pro, because ultimately we're hobbyists and you want to make something really fun. So the fact that you can bring physical magic onto the board, cool. The fact that you can kit bash them, pretty cool. They can add to list variety, so you can choose different manifestation laws. There are tons to choose from, as you can see here. You can have the Incarnate, or you can have these 4 spells from the Realm of Death, or these 4 other spells from the Realm of Death, or these other spells, 2 of which are from, well, at least 1 is from the Realm of Death. And then finally, these 3. So you've got quite a few options, but definitely not from certain realms, which I think is, you know, rubbish, but whatever. But you can have a lot of variety and choice here. Let me just go back to my list. So they can add list variety, so you can be like, oh, cool, you've taken the list that me and you normally play against, but you've chosen a different manifestation law. You've chosen the Incarnate this week. That's cool. Oh, your Incarnate isn't the Games Workshop Incarnate. Instead, you've kit bashed a really wicked, like, tree man thing because you're playing Sylvaneth. Really fun. I like that. So that's cool. Can add to list variety, so it can change up your list with just a single choice that doesn't cost you any points. But that is going to have a con we'll talk about in a bit. It can add to skill expression. They're definitely very impactful in the game. So being able to add to skill expression. What they can do is you can use the mobile ones to create zones of control. I've got a really good video about, well, I think it's good, sorry. I have a video about screening and zoning that you can look at. And manifestations are going to be able to screen and zone for your army, especially the mobile ones. You can use the static ones to set up bait traps and use manifestations to guard your armies and a bunch of other stuff. So they add utility into your army. We'll talk about that in a second. But you can add to the skill expression that you're able to do on the tabletop, because you can do more things. It massively benefits magic armies. If you're someone who thinks magic isn't strong enough, then you are going to get more effect and a stronger army because it benefits magic armies specifically. But there's a con to this because it does not benefit non-magic armies. We'll talk about it in a minute. It allows for more utility in armies. So some armies, like let's take Cogs, for example. Cogs allows you to re-roll charges. This is great for your army of combat pieces that really want to charge forward. That's good. because that gives you more utility, the ability to extend spell ranges, the ability to teleport, a bunch of different stuff that maybe your army normally can't do, so you can add these cool little additional things you can do with your army. Very interesting. It's pretty funny. They're pretty funny. Having a purple sun fight just a lad from Hammerhall, yeah, or the Geminids of Ulgish fighting against Lariel is pretty funny. Like, it is. You're like, oh, I can't believe. A good example would be I had the Hexgorger Skulls fighting a unit of Tree Revenants in a game the other day. It was pretty funny because the Hexgorger Skulls killed the Tree Revenants. But I think there's also a con to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then some of them look okay. I don't think there's many people out there that are going to say that they are the most stunning models. Gnashing Jaws is pretty fun, I guess. Like, it looks pretty good. But, and if I'm wrong, because this is subjective, let me know in the comments below which one you think are the best, or, oh no, Rob, actually, Lifeswarm is maybe the best model they've ever made from Games Workshop. But I would say that they've never really, at least the generic spell laws, have never really hit the top mark. I think there's some really nice ones. Sinesh are particularly good as an example, but not the generic ones. So I think those are the pros. But if you have more pros, then please let me know in the comments below. I want to see what your thoughts are about the pros and why you think they should be taken. Okay, let's talk about the cons. Okay, they look awful. Okay, and they do. Some of them look very bad. Okay, very, very bad, especially for something I have to see on the board all of the time because they're mandatory. I probably should put this in there as well. They are mandatory, which is a con, right? They are mandatory. So they're not a choice to take them. You just have to take some manifestations in your list. And therefore, you know, they're mandatory. Okay? They look awful. Most of them look awful, which is subjective, so I'm willing for you to disagree with me on that. They cost money. You're having to spend quite a lot of money to add something that is mandatory into your army. If you add in your army book and also your faction terrain, you are now having to spend probably, in English money, £100 maybe-ish before you ever buy a model to play in your army, with the exception of obviously manifestations. That's a lot, in my opinion. They cost a lot of money. But what doesn't cost a lot of money is the Honest Wargamer objective markers that you can pick up, which are great and very useful, unlike manifestations. Just thought I'd let you know about those. Another negative is that you need to bring more models to your game. If you're traveling on flights like you do a lot in the USA, or if you're in London, you're trying to get on the tube, you have to bring a lot more manifestations. And the manifestations are not very compact. For instance, the Purple Sun is quite a large piece, larger than most other models. So it's a pretty tough piece to bring along with you. So that is a negative. You are also going to have to do more hobby. Everyone now has to have their favorite manifestation lore painted up and ready to go, which is more hobby that you need to do. I should also mention the fact that some of them are, another negative is that there's also a delivery issue, a supply issue. Many people are struggling to even get the manifestations that they can get, and therefore that's another problem for them as well. Because they're mandatory and because they are fairly effective in the game, not being able to have them and not being able to bring them with you means you're effectively playing a weaker army versus your opponent. They also have fairly big narrative failure. All these order, chaos, and destruction factions will be throwing grave tides around. Doesn't feel quite right. You know, if you're running destruction, it would be quite fun for there to be a destruction lore. You know, obviously all the other negatives are still in effect, but at least it would make a little bit more sense. You know, having like a big foot of Gork or some other things, I think that that is a negative for me personally. If you're playing death, though, don't worry. You've got all of the manifestations basically represent death in many ways. Another problem with, as they're written at this point in Age of Sigmar 4, is that they are of equal potential cost, because everything that you, the points cost for all of the manifestation laws are 0. The only stipulation is that you need lots of wizards, which is an additional con, in my opinion. And because they all cost 0, whichever is the most effective manifestation law will be the manifestation law that you choose, because it's better. So it costs 0, but, and I've talked about this multiple times across Age of Sigmar, I think many things should be pointed because it gives the rules writers wiggle room. As an example, when you're taking artifacts or you're taking heroic traits, You could have a really silly, strong heroic trait, but it costs you a lot of points. You can also have a pretty useless, not very useful heroic trait, but it doesn't cost many points. And therefore, you get to do some list building. It would also mean that those spare points that you have in an army list can be utilized for doing stuff in your army, which is quite cool. I'm not talking about having to pay an additional point per model for shields. I'm just saying of the 3 heroic traits that they've written, you could have one cost 100 points, one cost 50, one cost 25, and they could all do different stuff at that level, which is actually very smart, in my opinion. But they don't do this, therefore it's a negative. Because they all cost the same, they're hard to balance, because they all need to be equal, and they're not equal, therefore they're hard to balance. It doesn't encourage non-wizard builds because they might be as effective as some units, which we'll talk about in a minute. That means you need wizards to cast them. Some armies have better wizards than other armies. Some wizards feel fairly mandatory, like with Seraphon. The Slan, who's a 3-cast wizard, is going to be able to cast 3 manifestations and also bring units back from the dead. So you get all of this value baked into a single model, in my opinion. Okay. So they're a negative for armies without wizards. In addition, I would really like my army to do cool stuff, not some generic spell. When I go to the store or I shop online or I see a cool army, I'm like, I really want to collect Cities of Sigmar. I really like the look of how they feel. I like the background. I like the narrative. I really like, what the Wilder Corpse Hunters do. I like the little doggos in the unit, and that's great. And when 9 times out of 10, they're just getting their face eaten by the Gravetide, I start to get a little bit disappointed because I'm going to have to continuously face that. And therefore, my unit is just dying to a spell. And it doesn't feel like I'm really engaging with the enemy army. I'm dealing with something that comes from the end of the board, like from nowhere, which is rubbish. Some of the rules on the manifestations as today are not written very well and have already caused some contention in different conversations. They're very confusing and very bad for new players. Having run 2 events, and the feedback I've got from TOs over the world is that multiple people are struggling to understand how manifestations work. It has been a continuous sticking point for tournament gamers. Therefore, I imagine it's even more difficult for casual to chilled or even new players because they're having to work out how units work, and then there feels like this is additional addendum added on top, which is basically the same, but not quite the same. And I think that's very confusing for bad players. While it was very funny over time, I think eventually it's less funny over time. And I kind of talked about this already. So as your Bloodthirster is killed by Gravetide again, or the Purple Sun again kills a unit, or the Maelstrom blows up and does an amazing amount of mortal damage into your army, and there's not really much you can maybe do to stop it, that is a real problem for the longevity of the game. You really want, Shalaxi to fight against Archeon or something similar, not constantly be fighting a manifestation. And I think eventually it becomes annoying. Obviously, that is a subjective chance, but we'll see. And then easy replenishable, therefore more effective than many units. Many units can't be brought back from the dead. But if you kill a manifestation, I can resummon a manifestation, even in your opponent's turn. So I put a manifestation out, you kill it, I summon it again, you re-kill it. You are wasting your combat potential, your shooting potential, a bunch of other stuff in having to kill something that is just constantly coming back to life. That is really difficult, especially if your opponent has got a magic ascendancy above you and they're going to be fairly unfetteredly bringing as many manifestations as they can and casting them better than you. There are not many unbinds or dispels that are very good in many armies, and some armies are just not as strong magically as other armies. So that disparity becomes even broader as you're using more aggressively powerful magic armies who are constantly bringing back resources versus your opponent who can never do that. So I think that's bad. And lastly, it slows gameplay down, which you can kind of see the recursion, the constantly resummoning of these units brought back, slowing the game down. I'm going to cast this spell, put that unit down. If some of these units cost, even if they cost 50 points, some of those manifestation laws could be adding 200 points onto a board every turn. It's quite a lot of units to keep adding on. Obviously, also with these manifestations coming back to life, we're ignoring the fact that many armies have a recursion as well and bringing lots of models and units back. And genuinely, that also slows the game down as well. Like, the game is not fast, especially if you're on the new to casual side, and therefore that's slowing them down more. Okay, so I feel like that's fair, but if you don't agree with any of these things, obviously please do leave them in the comments. I'm very interested to read what those are, and I'm really interested to learn in what you think, because that is what this is about. It's about conversation. I don't think I'm right about everything. I'm just telling you some of the things I think and trying to present them, I think, fairly. So what are the solutions? Because we can't just leave it there. We need some solutions. Okay, so some solutions that we've got. They cost points. The different manifestation laws cost points. I've already talked about things costing points. Being a very effective way of controlling the power level of a unit. That's pretty fair. I think a lot of people like that. Another one is that they're removed from the game completely and you don't use this module. I actually quite like that idea, if I'm 100% honest. I do think the idea of manifestation on the board is kind of fun, but the game's interactive enough, and I quite like the fact that armies are battling. If they deleted manifestations, I wouldn't care. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh no. I would just be like, okay, that's fine. I get to do the thing I wanted to do anyway, which is have units fight. So I feel like that's okay. But I think some people would be not happy with that. So there you go. Only summonable once per game. So I quite like that idea as well. So you're only able to summon one of them once per turn, like successfully summon them. And once they're dead, right? That, like, you can't use them again. And some people like they'll be less effective. Well, that's kind of the point of what we're talking about. They might currently be too effective. So just having stuff just be dead, like, is fine. That's how other units work in Age of Sigmar. Like, you kill them and they die, and that's it, feels fine. Okay. And then you can't summon in the enemy turn. You can currently use a command ability to summon a manifestation in your opponent's hero phase, which means that you're going to be able to move it in your next turn. You can use it to control the board space, block deep strikes, and a bunch of other stuff, and therefore you would reduce their effectiveness. So there's a bunch of different things there. Reduce their effectiveness, can't summon in the opponent's turn, only summonable once per game. Completely just remove them because you don't use this module. And then they cost points, which I think is a reasonable solution as well. But if you have more suggestions, do leave them in the comments on this YouTube video and let me know what you think. I'm hoping with this video just to make a conversational piece around manifestations. It could be that in a couple of weeks, these aren't a problem at all. Although I've played a few games, they really do feel like a problem. They feel like it's a bit much. And I feel like the thing that's free shouldn't be a bit much. That's it. Even the lowliest wizard who has no attacks and has no survivability is like 100 points. So something that's completely free and can return from the dead multiple times feels like it is just so much better than many units. And I would like to play with the units. So maybe that's a me thing. Maybe that's a personal bias. And maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like many people are sharing this sentiment, and therefore I'm just trying to give a voice to that conversation, and then we can all talk about it as well, which I think is cool. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching my video. Thanks to the chat for helping me come up with this list, and I'll see you guys soon.